Let's take a look at some information and charts on Ethereum Classic for BraveNewCoin. So Ethereum Classic was born out of the DAO bailout split many years ago at this point. And for the most part, I'm guessing many people don't pay attention to ETC or just ignore it entirely. That's fine. It will probably only show its importance once ETH goes proof of stake, because at that point, there's a big risk of issues occurring, arising, and that's probably the biggest trading opportunity in the future for ETC, and that could be months, years. I don't know when ETH will actually implement proof of stake, but that's really the use case for ETC in my mind here, is a hedge against ETH failing. So they have had some issues with chain splits, with 51% attacks. They've had issues with all sorts of stuff in the past. I don't really trade this myself directly, but I think it's worth talking about, looking at, mainly because of the Grayscale Trust, which holds 10% of all circulating ETC at 590, nearly 600 million, let's say, which is their third largest trust between BTC and ETH. This sort of arose because of Barry Silbert's involvement early on in the ETC chain split, paying for development, setting funds aside for development through the trust, that sort of thing. And this all happened July 2016, so it's ancient history at this point. Most people new in crypto probably have no idea what the differences are. This stuff's listed on Robinhood, I think, still, and it's kind of a mystery to me. It doesn't have the fundamental footprint, let's say, that ETH has, or even the other layer 1 chains have. It doesn't really have DeFi or any of that sort of thing that I am aware of. And if it's there, no one's really using it. So we've got the Grayscale Trust. That's a big impacting factor here as to what's going on. They're also negative 32% below spot. So they're in a lot of trouble based on that discount. And they've already bought buyback, basically. They, being Grayscale, has bought back a significant amount of ETC, and they'll probably have to keep doing this over time. If this goes to minus 40, minus 50, there's nothing legally compelling them, I don't think, to right the ship. It's more of a social impact of people complaining, saying, you're not doing anything, you're collecting fees, management fees on this, and it's still this deep in a discount. So that's an interesting factor for the ETC puzzle. Another factor here in the future is going to be hash rate on ETC versus ETH. And when ETH does go proof of stake, you're going to see this hash rate flip, because there won't be any hash rate on ETH. It'll have to go somewhere. So it probably ends up where it can go, and that's ETC. Currently, hash rate on ETH is several multiples above ETC. Mining revenue is several multiples above ETC as well. So it just doesn't make too much sense to mine ETC at the moment, especially with the fees on ETH being as high as they are. Now, there are 2 miners coming for the ETH algorithm, ETC algorithm, at 4 cents per kilowatt hour. They're pretty profitable, especially relative to everything else. So again, if you're buying these and ETH goes proof of stake, you have to attempt to get ROI somewhere. So you're going to see an explosion in ETC hash rate. Like I said, they did have a chain split. ETC has a history of issues. Seemingly every quarter, they have something big happening. I don't think it's important because I don't pay attention to it specifically. And when these things do happen, even the 51% attacks, the market didn't care. The price just kept on trading. So if you are trading this directly, it's important to know about the fundamental flaws and issues going on. But at the end of the day, sadly, it hasn't really affected anything. I mean, look at Solana. It went down for almost an entire day, and it's trading as though nothing happened. As far as the on-chain data, transaction counts basically rising back to all-time highs, average transaction values falling. And this could be a mining effect or some other DeFi thing that I don't know about. But if we compare that to ETH as far as transaction counts, I mean, it's no contest. Again, it's 700K versus over 1 million per day. Very clearly what's going on there between the two chains. NVT rising dramatically from lows over the past couple weeks since late July, and active addresses since mid-August or 2020 are rising. But again, if we compare this to ETH, it's no contest. We have over 500,000 versus under 35,000 on ETC. And all these numbers are likely to slosh around once proof of stake actually hits ETH. For MVRV, direct measure of market cap versus on-chain activity, in general, most coins top out at a 2x multiple price-wise. Occasionally, you see higher highs in price with lower highs in MVRV, which probably should be seen as a sign of bearish divergence. Most recently, this did hit that 2x magic number and then kept going for more as the MVRV was declining, price kept increasing here. So I still like 2 as the magic number for be careful territory, 2x multiple. It's almost as if 2x multiple says get ready to sell, and then when MVRV starts to decline, that tells you definitely sell. And then if you see a higher high in price and a lower high on MVRV, that's a definite sell. You know, those are, I guess, the rules that I would set up for that. MVRV is currently below 1, and it looks like MVRV below 0.6 is generally been a pretty good buy. Below 0.8, somewhere down there. So it's not quite in the buy zone, definitely not anywhere close to the sell zone. Flipping gears to technicals, this is the 1 year MA in the bottom. The red line is 5x that, and the midline is 2.5x that. And there isn't a ton of data here to look at. Most of ETC's history has been in the buy zone, but most recently did tap that 5x multiple of the 1 year MA at prices above 50 to 100. That was all telling you this is overheated, this is overbought, be careful, this is in uncharted territory. And sure enough, it sold off. That isn't always the case. Sometimes it can keep going for months, but if it's like this, where it's the first time it's ever hit this multiple, it's usually a pretty good sign that things are massively overheated. And if we look at it on the 12-hour or the 183 MA, it also hit that overbought territory. Currently in the buy zone, which I don't know if I necessarily believe. I like a buy zone basically at 30 relative to current prices. I would be much more comfortable with that than 50. I mean, the fundamentals tell you what to buy, technicals tell you when to buy. For me, the fundamentals on ETC are basically non-existent, zero. So this is purely technical play if you're trading this, and you just have to know that, yeah, this thing could just collapse, right? It's probably not going to get delisted anywhere anytime soon, but it just doesn't really make sense as a trade for me. Looking at the 5200, it's currently crossed bullish. It's above a year, monthly pivot rather. The S1 there, it's on the 200-day moving average. So it needs to hold this level or it's headed probably sub 30, 22, 18, somewhere in there. All the volume is sub 22 for the most part. So there's very little support on the downside here if this thing collapses. RSI is already leaning towards oversold. So any lower lows here will probably put in a bullish divergence. As far as the chart, it just looks like a mess to me. I mean, it's historically always been a mess. But this just isn't, you could argue bullish trend and that's fine, but it just doesn't look necessarily bullish to me. Daily cloud has it leaning bearish as well, with price below the cloud. It needs to hold above 60 into Q4 in order for this thing to remain bullish. So I guess that's a level alert to watch in the future. Otherwise, the expectation with the current price position relative to the cloud is lower lows, bearish trend. That's the expectation. ETC, BTC had a chance to break up. It had a pretty decent flag pennant thing going for it, but it didn't, right? It's just the way it goes. Again, the fundamentals of ETC versus BTC. Why would you ever hold ETC over BTC? Occasionally it'll do these crazy moves, but any altcoin will do that. The trend is holding bullish, but again, to me, this is not anything I want to touch. It's below the VPVR levels. It's ready to break down below another VPVR level. This just, it isn't a buy for me. And then ETC, ETH, again, the only trade that makes sense here is relative to the proof of stake, proof of work transition that ETH will have in the future. I just don't think anybody would rather hold ETC over ETH for any reason. Trend is also ready to flip bearish here. If, let's say, for some miraculous thing happens with ETH and it collapses, right? The level to watch here would be anything above 0.5. Anything above 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, and ETC is probably fundamentally shifting what's going on with the chain relative to ETH. Otherwise, it's probably just going to range here indefinitely. Lastly, let me just mention the ETH-BTC fund and DeFi portfolio. I trade for Techme Capital on Enzyme.finance, a non-custodial portfolio management solution where you can send Ether USDC or just watch what I'm doing. You can see everything, including AUM, performance, allocation, all the fun vaults and things I'm in here on Yearn, Comp, and Aave, as well as the trades and deposits in the tabs down below. That's all for this one. Like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe, and happy trading.